There are a lot of project types in Visual Studio, but do you know what they all do? In this video, we're going to be looking at the catch-all category of services and other project types. We're going to review our options for class libraries. We're going to look at what services are compared to console apps, and we're going to look at our standard unit tests that are provided in Visual Studio. Now, if you don't know, this is going to be an overview video that goes on the csharpprojects.com site, and I will show you where that is in just a minute. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. I do that by providing videos here on YouTube multiple times per week. Plus, I have a weekly podcast. I also provide courses on C#, web development, and much more at imtimcorey.com. The profits from those sales are what pays for the free content here on YouTube, so that everyone can have a great education in C#, not just those who can afford it. So let's go over to that C# project site. And this is a free resource I provide to really give you a good overview of what's out there. Because the Visual Studio has a ton of project types, but what are they? How do they work? And how do I get started in those categories? So I've broken it down into 5 different areas. We've got desktop, web. Right now we're going to deal with service and other. We also have mobile and have gaming, which is coming soon. But we're going to concentrate here on the service and other. In this video, it's going to show up right down here where it says coming soon, this button. So the service and other categories, kind of a catch-all. We have desktop, which we know WinForms, WPF, UWP, now .NET, MAUI, and Blazor Hybrid, and Console. That's desktop apps. And we have web apps, which are API, Razor Pages, MVC, Blazors, and all the rest. But there's this other category of projects that are very, very important, and really they're pretty foundational to a lot of developers, regardless of whether you are a web developer or a desktop developer or back-end versus front-end. They're really foundational to you. And so even though they're in the service/other category, they're actually one of the more important categories in this whole page. So if you watch this video and go, hey, you know what? I want to go deeper into that one. Let's just say worker service comes up. This is one that people don't often know about. They don't even know that worker service exists, and it's a really powerful tool to be able to build if you know how to do it right. Well, if you click on this, there is prerequisites. You just need to know C#. But then here's an intro video to get you started. If you want to go deeper, there's a C# master course. That's a complete path from knowing nothing about C# to being a C# developer professionally. So it will cover worker service, but a lot more than that. But you can just get started for free right here. So this is a tool for you to use for free to make sure you understand what these projects are, because it's important to put more tools in your toolbox. The more tools you have, the better you'll be prepared to face any new situation. Because people often say, well, what's the best thing to know? And really, I say C# is the best thing to know, because if you try and limit yourself, and let's say you're like, oh, I really want to know MVC because I think that's the best thing to know. It used to be, and it's not anymore. Okay, there's other project types for the web that are outpacing MVC in a lot of areas. But here's the deal. Just because there's a good one that is useful for a lot of cases doesn't mean it's useful for all cases. In fact, this web page right here is not built upon Blazor Server, which is, I'm a big fan of Blazor Server. It's not built upon it. It's not built upon C# at all. And in fact, imtimcorey.com, which I just rebuilt. We had a team work together. My team worked together on rebuilding that entire site. We didn't use C# at all, because even though C# has some great tools, it wasn't the right tool for our specific situation. Now, if you go to the suggestions site, suggestions.imtimcorey.com, that was written in Blazor Server because that was the right tool for that job. So having the ability to have more tools in your toolbox allows you to make better choices. So even though you may say, hey, I want to focus in on this particular one right here or this one right here, just because you focus on one doesn't mean you don't expand your palette to have knowledge, at least, of these other areas, so that when a situation comes up, you say, you know what, I think actually this project type might be best for this situation. So that's why we're going through this. That's why it's so important to know all of these and have at least a base experience in all of them so you can have the ability to make better decisions down the road. So we're going to focus in on this category today with service/other. So we're going to focus on console, worker service, class library, and I have XUnit project here, but really that's a stand for all unit test projects. I just prefer XUnit. So if you go to csharpprojects.com, www.csharpprojects.com, you can get this list. It'll be linked down in the description as well. But let's look at these different project types. So we're going to create a new project. We're not going to actually build source code today. So don't focus in on source code itself. Focus in on just the different types of things we're going to learn. So let's start off with selecting up here library. So we have C# library. And we're not going to create these because, again, we're not focusing in on an intro to each of these things. We're focusing on the broad picture of what these different things are for and knowing that they exist. And then you can go deeper into the intros of each of these things. So under C# library, you would think we have one, class library, right? But we have a lot. So this list is a pretty large list. And what that indicates is there's a lot of different library types. And often people don't realize that. So we have the traditional and the standard C# class library. This is a class library that would encourage every person to have used in almost every project. Okay? If you are creating a C# application, you'd almost always benefit from a class library. I don't want to be too dramatic here. I don't want to go too far overboard there, but most projects would benefit from a class library. Not all of them. Again, there are almost no absolutes in programming. And if you try to apply an absolute, like this is the best, this is the one to do, that's a pretty foolish take because it is situationally dependent. So you need to make a choice based upon what's best for your specific situation. And if you try to make it too generic or try and force one best thing to apply always, then you're really going to hurt yourself down the road. And that's why I say almost always. So class library is a very important tool. It's not required tools. It's just very important. But the class library isn't the only type of library. If you notice, we have Razor class library. This is for Razor components, or WPF for WPF components. For custom controls in WPF, there's a different library. For user controls in WPF, there's a different library. One for Universal Window Project, which, by the way, just so you know, Universal Window Platform has been deprecated. So I wouldn't start a new project in that, but if you are working in UWP, then this might be beneficial. We also have the .NET Framework library. If you're not familiar, I do have a video on .NET Framework versus .NET Core. .NET Framework is the old C#, and it's actually still supported. People think it's been abandoned and all the rest. It's not. It's still supported. It's just not being updated. All right, there's a difference. So Microsoft still supports it, still supports you using it, but when it comes to writing new C# code, it's highly encouraged you use the latest version of .NET, which is different. .NET is actually based upon .NET Core. It was .NET Core, and they just dropped the core off the name once we got past the version 4. So we had .NET Core 1, .NET Core 2, 2.1, 3, 3.1, and then we had .NET Core, or .NET 5, it skipped 4, and then we had .NET 6, and coming up soon is .NET 7. So that's the new version. If you want to start a new project, do it in .NET or .NET Core. So don't use this unless you're working on a legacy project that uses .NET Framework, in which case you'd want to use this class library because this is compatible with .NET Framework applications. All right, we also have .NET Framework versions of our WPF libraries, and also had Windows Form Control library for .NET Framework. But again, notice .NET Framework. This would not be compatible with .NET Core. And then again, UWP, and we have, there is our Windows Form class library. This would be for .NET 6. So, or .NET Core, these two right here. So just be careful. If it says .NET Framework, it's the old stuff. If it does not say, then it's the new stuff, .NET. All right, so it targets .NET Windows Forms, which, yes, I know that .NET is confusing because we had .NET Framework, which we just shortened or abbreviated to .NET usually. But now we're using .NET to mean .NET 5, 6, and beyond. Okay, so that's the class library options. A class library just holds a library. It's like having, well, a physical library, which is why it's called library. You put code in there and reference it, so that you can't call it directly. You can't run a class library. You cannot execute a class library. You cannot, hit F5 and have it do something. Instead, it has to be referenced by something else. Okay, so when we create a class library, let's create a general class library. I call it class library 1. And this is just, I'm not going to give this to you because, again, I'm not going to create any code here. But let's just call this demo projects, or projects demo. And we'll do .NET 6. So when you create a class library, you can't hit the run button. Okay, if you do that, it's going to give you an error and say, nope, can't do that. It's cannot be started directly. And that's because of the fact that it's not executable. It creates a DLL. All right, so this is just to be used, to be referenced by other projects. And that's why we have the other project library types as well, because you may have a WPF project where you're reusing some components or reusing some front-end code in WPF. And you say, you know what? I'm reusing this between projects. What if I put this into a library? And so you have a WPF library. And there's really not a whole lot of difference between a WPF library and a regular library. It's just that the WPF library is designed to be used with a user interface, whereas the class library is designed to be used kind of at a lower level, not necessarily having any UI code in it. In fact, I would encourage you not to put user interface code in your class library, in your regular class library. And the reason for that is because then you can replace your user interface with a different one and still use the same class library and reuse that library. So this is all about code reuse. That's a big deal with class libraries. If you've ever used a NuGet package, you're really using a class library. That's really what it is. It's a class library that you're just calling from somebody else's project, only they're giving it to you as a DLL, but wrapped in a nice package so it can be updated. So that's the class library type. And again, I'd encourage you to watch the intro class library video because the class library type is a really important one to know. I think every developer should know that pretty close to the start of their C# career. Like when you're just starting to learn C#, you should learn first the console application type and learn basic syntax debugging, those kind of things. But as soon as you get into creating classes, you should almost immediately create a class library. That's just a good way of learning at that point because you need to grow with this thing. You need to use it a lot. And so it's important to learn pretty early on your development journey. Okay, let's go back to our solution and say add new project type. And let's look at other project types. We have a class library. Let's go and look at the unit tests. So we'll look at test category. And this filter system, by the way, is a great way to kind of dial in what you want to see and kind of explore at the same time. So you can say, you know what do you have for Office? Well, I don't have anything installed, but you could have Office stuff here. You could have, SQL stuff. You'd have to change to all languages to see the SQL project type. And we'll get back to that one in a minute. But we have, for us, C# test project type. Because there are, if you said all languages, there are even more because you have VB, and I also have some stuff for F#. So let's dial into C#. So this allows us to see that there are multiple test project types that I have installed in my version of Visual Studio. And if you don't have all the same things that I do in your version of Visual Studio, I have Visual Studio 2022 Community Edition. It's the free version of Visual Studio. If it's still not the same as what you have, then you'd go to the Tools menu and let's just look at it real quick. Tools, Get Tools and Features. When you open this up, it's going to allow you to change or configure what Visual Studio has installed, and it's loading up for me right now. Wait for it. This is a little bit slow, but this is what I have installed. So if you look, you can kind of pause the video and see which things I have installed. This changes. So for example, I don't have Unity installed, but I'm going to be installing that soon because I want to do some practice stuff with Unity. I've got some ideas for some games I want to create, but I also want to show you all the cool stuff that you can do with Unity. So you can check and uncheck these boxes and change the installation size on your disk if you need to save some space or if you want to add or remove features. So those are the things that I have checked. You can also install the different runtimes. So I have .NET Framework 4.6, 4.7.2, and 4.8 installed, so I can target those. And that's how I've configured my version of Visual Studio. So back to where we were, let's go back here and say add new project. We were on testing, and I have MS test, NUnit test, and then let's skip this one for now. It's a .NET Framework, and I have XUnit test, and then I also have web driver test for Edge for .NET Core, and then I have unit test app for Universal Windows or UWP. So those are the ones that I could use. Now I skipped over the .NET Framework one again because it's .NET Framework and it's MS test. So I have all these different unit test project types. Which one would I choose? Well, that does depend on your preference. Some people swear by NUnit. Some people swear by MS test. Some people swear by XUnit. Some people just don't care and use whatever one they feel like at the time. Personally, I kind of like XUnit, but really I have enjoyed using all three of them, MS test, NUnit, and XUnit. In general, XUnit and NUnit tend to lead the way. They tend to be the innovators in testing. The MS test product tends to trail behind a little bit. It's done a lot better recently and has gotten a lot closer to the other two, but it tends to trail a little bit behind the other two. So NUnit and XUnit are community projects that Microsoft has put into Visual Studio. So they're actually third-party project types that Microsoft has adopted as part of their ecosystem. So which one you choose is up to you. Again, I have a video intro to XUnit that goes over XUnit. If there's enough desire, I'll do an NUnit or MS test one. If people really want to see one of those, let me know by going to the suggestion site. If you leave a comment down below a video, it's helpful, and it helps both the video get more traction, but also it helps because I do read the comments. Even if I don't reply to everyone, I read pretty much every comment. I try to read everyone, but every once in a while I miss one. I catch it later or something. But if you leave it on a suggestion site, then others can upvote it. And then that's what I go to and I look for, hey, what videos should I create? I go there and look. I don't always look for the top voted one. Now, I tend to lean towards doing the top voted ones, but I do look at all the suggestions, but the more votes it has, the more likely it is that I'll consider it. Okay? So suggestions.imtimcorey.com if you want to see MS tests or NUnit intro videos. But they're pretty much the same as XUnit, just the syntax is a little different in how they approach testing. So which one do you choose? Whichever one you decide you like best. Whichever one seems to fit your way of testing the best. And if you don't know, flip a coin, find the best documentation, whichever works best for you. If you're coming into a company, use the one they use. Don't try and change them unless you have a really good reason. Try to use the one they use. There is not a wrong answer here. Okay, there's not a bad choice here. It's just which choice is going to work best for your situation. And then WebDriver test for Edge. This is for testing UI testing of websites. Okay, so it's a very specific project type. And then this for, again, UWP. That's for testing UWP projects. But again, UWP has been discontinued, deprecated. So at this point, I would not recommend creating new projects in UWP. So what does a test project look like? Pretty simple. In fact, it's basically class library. So let's create the XUnit one. That's it. That's it. We have our using statements here. So it's a global using for XUnit. But then we have just this one class that is a demo class to show us what a test would look like. And so we have our namespace, we have our class, and we have our test. And the only way we know it's a test and not just a class of the method is we have fact over it. That indicates this is a test. There's also the option of having another, which is theory. Okay, you wouldn't have both, you have one or the other. But one of these indicates that it's a test, and so it will run this and check the assertions. So in unit testing, if you're not familiar, what we do is we test our code. Specifically, we test a unit of work in unit tests. So there are other types of tests. It's not just unit testing. There's also larger sets of testing up through end-to-end testing. But the majority of your tests should be unit tests. A unit test tests one unit of work, one little thing, and it will run your code. And then you say, let's say it's an addition method. And you say, I have an addition method. It adds two numbers together. And you say, okay, I'm going to test 2 plus 2. And I expect to get back 4. And it runs the method and says, here's the actual value. Let's compare those two. I expect 4. What was the actual value? If it's 4, then the test passes. If it's 3, the test fails. So this way you can test your code and verify that it works the way you expect it to. Now, there is some pushback on, do we need this? It's actually writing a lot more code, and so therefore it's slowing me down. Yes, unit tests are pretty important for writing good code. Do you have to do it to write good code? No, you don't have to do it. But it increases greatly your chances of writing good code, and it decreases your chances of putting out bugs because you find the bugs earlier because you validated it. If you want more details on that and my thoughts on the extremes, no tests is one extreme. The other test is test-driven development or extreme test-driven development on the other side. I'll give my thoughts in my intro to unit testing video, which again is on the C# projects site. You can go there and look at the unit test video, intro to unit tests, and really see what my thoughts are. Spoiler, I land in the middle, where I'm not extreme on either end. So that's my thought. But unit testing is pretty important. All it really is a console app, but Visual Studio can pick these up and it can run them. It can discover them and says, oh, hey, you know what? You got a test. We have test 1 right here. We haven't run it yet. So we could run it right in Visual Studio and test our code, which of course is not testing anything yet. But this is also tied to notice 0 references, and we have this little indicator here, test not run. Well, it will tag your code and show you what things are tested and how many have passed versus failed, and it will give you a really good idea of where your code is at. It will also allow you to have a lot more confidence when it comes to changing your code, because when you make a change, you have to go, is this going to work? And if the expected outputs are the same for the given inputs, then you're probably okay. you may have refactored the code, and so you know what, your expected outputs shouldn't change. But if they do, your refactoring wasn't quite right. Now, the pushback again, and I'll go into this much more in detail in the intro video, but the pushback is, yes, my code is changing the expected outputs. Well, then you should make sure that you're changing that code everywhere. Because yes, if it breaks a unit test, that means some work for you. But if you get a broken unit test because you changed expectations, you should check everywhere that that code has been called, because expectations have changed for everywhere. So that's just an important thing to think through. All right, so that's unit testing. That's another big section of projects that you should at least have some familiarity with. Once you get down the road into, let's say, object-oriented programming and start getting into really practicing more with your C#, maybe you got a good handle on syntax, you got a good handle on creating some basic projects, I would encourage you to learn about unit testing and start to learn how to create good tests for your applications. Now, that is going to mean that you will change how you write your code in order to be more testable. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. Because code that is more testable is also code that is following the solid principles. It is following dry, don't repeat yourself. It's really code that is written in a better way for maintainability. So even if nothing else happens out of it, the fact that you write your code to be more maintainable is a really good thing. Okay, so I've saved, let's do one more before we do the best for last. And this is kind of a bonus one before we get to the best for last. And I briefly showed you this, but let's go to SQL. Now, again, if you don't have all the same options I do installed, you might not have this one. But I wanted to at least touch on it. It's not on the Discover C# projects site or the C# project site because of the fact that it's not a C# project. However, it's a project that we use hand in hand with C#. And that is the SQL Server database project. All right. This is often known as SSDT for SQL Server Data Tools. And what it is it's a project you can put in Visual Studio. Let's just run it real quick. We'll call it Database 1. And this is a project you put in Visual Studio in your solution that creates a SQL database. And you can not only create your SQL database, you could import an existing one and work with that database. But what it allows you to do is do things like refactoring on your SQL database. It allows you to do all the cool stuff you do with Visual Studio, but in SQL. It allows you to put your SQL database under source control. It allows you to see what changes happened over the different versions. It allows you to deploy changes to your SQL database with your code automatically using the CI/CD process. So you would, really simple here, I've got a whole intro video to SSDT on the YouTube channel, but you would add, let's say a table. And you just say, yes, I want a table. Let's call it table 1 for now. And there is your SQL table. You start creating your, first name. And that's an nvarchar 50, sure. And last name. And all of a sudden you have your SQL statement down here written. You can change this to be an identity, like so. And now it's auto incrementing from, starting at 1 and going up 2, 3, 4. All this good stuff you can do right in your project. And you can deploy this, like I said, locally for testing. They can have it be in your CI/CD process, so it's deployed to different servers. It can upgrade your databases. It's just a great tool for working with SQL in Visual Studio. I recommend when you're building your SQL Server, you use SSDT because it's designed to build databases. When you want to manage your SQL database, meaning when you want to work with configuring permissions and checking to make sure that queries are running efficiently and all that good stuff, That's where SQL Server Management Studio, SSMS, comes in. That's more of a management tool. You can definitely build databases in SSMS. That's what I used for years. But with this, it's just a step up from that. It makes it so much easier and better. And again, putting your database in source control is huge, and it's free. So check out SSDT. All right, so kind of our last but best. This project type is one that, again, it's missed by a lot of people. Under services, if we come down here, we have worker service. And this is kind of a innocuous project type that, again, gets overlooked quite a bit. It's an empty project template for creating worker services. Let's create it and call it worker service 1 and say yes, .NET 6. And let's close all these. Let's look at what a worker service is. If we go to program.cs, low configuration, this is a console application. That's really the foundation of it. Now, you may say, well, Tim, no one uses console applications. Guess what? Pretty much everybody uses console applications. In fact, there's very few project types, base project types in Visual Studio. Web projects are all console applications. So this worker service is a console application. This also means that this is cross-platform. You can install this on Linux, on Mac, on Windows. You can install this in the cloud on Azure. So you can install this in a lot of different places. You can also run it like it's a console application. So this is the configuration, the program.cs. This is your actual code. That's all there is right here. So let's read through this real quick. This is a background service, is what it inherits from. And we have our constructor, which brings in an iLogger, which also indicates, and you can see this right here, that it has dependency injection. So if you really needed to have additional dependencies injected in, no problem, it can handle that. But then we have this one method, and this method is all we need. All right, so this method, execute async, let's unpin this. This method executes repeatedly. That's what this method does. Now, in here, you've got a while. We don't have the stop token from the cancellation token. But while that's not the case, we log a message that says worker is running at and given the time. And then you wait 1 second. All right. So that's their demo to show you, here's how we do, repeating. And that's just by looping. However, you can choose to do it a different way if you want, but this method is going to run until it's done. Now, this continues to keep this method running. That way, the service continues to run. That's what you want. You want this method to never stop. Because once it stops, the service stops. Services are meant to run continuously. Now, let's talk briefly about what a service is. A service is an application that runs in the background of your computer. It runs continually. You have a lot of services. In fact, let me pull up my task manager, and I'm going to go to the services tab. These are services that are installed on my computer that may or may not be running at this time, but there's quite a few that are. And if you notice, I'm scrolling, there's a lot installed. And most of these are pretty standard. Even the Xbox stuff, that comes with Windows. So now notice they're all stopped, but there's a lot of stuff in here that runs in the background. Now, you don't want to have a bunch of stuff running you don't want. However, this is a pretty common practice to have a service running in the background. The worker service project allows you to create that service. So it allows you to create an application that runs in the background of your machine. Now, there's a few things that are very important to understand about the worker service. We're going to see the comparison here. So a worker service, like I said, runs in the background of your computer. It runs continually. Notice it says running right here. In fact, if we look at the, if we sort this, all right, so there's the top. I'm going to scroll down. there's where it stops. So all these from here on up, they're all running right now on my computer. Lots of stuff. That's because there's a lot of things that, Windows Audio needs to make sure it processes the audio of my computer. The clipboard service is running. There's cryptographic services, DHCP client, Docker engine, lots of stuff that's installed and running on my computer. So you can create tools like this. But here's the key. These services are not specific to my profile. Now, if you have a personal computer, you probably aren't real familiar with Windows profiles because of the fact that you just start your computer and it launches right up to the desktop. But if you're in a corporate environment, you probably are very familiar with Windows profiles because when you launched your computer, it asks you to log in. And so you log into your profile. And other people can log onto your computer as well, but they get their own profile. This is actually built into Windows, and everybody has a profile. It's just that on personal editions of Windows, typically that profile is either auto-logged in or is protected, but there's only one profile there and just keeps people from directly accessing your information. So the service does not run under one profile, which means it does not have the ability to interact with the user. Okay, so when you run a service, you can't have a user interface. You can't have dialog boxes pop up. You can't ask the user for input. These are not things services are designed to do because they're designed to not be dependent on the profile. And why is that? Well, because if I have 5 different people logging on my computer throughout the day, there are certain things I want to run no matter who's logged in. For example, the Docker engine. Well, Docker shouldn't be dependent on who's logged in. So therefore, it's going to run even when no one is logged in because it's logged in the background separate from everybody else. And let's just open up Docker real quick. Let's go to details. Is that it? Nope. Oh, we have to open services for this. Okay, so let's go back to Docker, Docker desktop service. Okay, go to properties. And notice the startup type's automatic, all right? And then log on. This is who the Docker service logs in as. Remember, there's different profiles on your computer. It's logging in as a local system account. That means that it has the permissions of a local system. You could change that to be an actual account. I could change it to be my account. Now, here's a hack. I could change this to be my account. And then because it is my account that's logged in as, the service could, in theory, pop up messages, user interface messages that I could interact with. However, that's definitely a hack because of the fact that those messages, if they try and pop up when I'm not logged in, could cause things to be blocked because I'm not logged in. I can't get that user interface message. Or if somebody else is logged in, they couldn't get that message because it's not showing on their profile. It's showing on my profile, even though I'm not logged in. So that's not the way of going about things. If you need to have user interactivity, you should not use a service. But if you need to have something that runs in the background, that runs even when no one's logged in, the service is the way to go. So what are some examples of a service? Think things like backups. A backup should run no matter who's logged in or if no one's logged in. Really, that's ideal if no one's logged in because if no one's logged in, then probably the files aren't going to be locked. So a backup would be a great thing to run as a service. And you may create little backup utilities in a C# application. You could create a service for those. Now, what if you decide, no, I really need to have some user interactivity? Well, that's a per user thing because different users will have different options. For example, if I was going to back up my documents and we wanted to have me say, yes, these pictures and no, those pictures in my documents, well, that would be per person because I shouldn't be able to see someone else's pictures and they shouldn't be able to see my pictures. Therefore, it shouldn't be a service that's doing that. It should be instead a regular desktop application. One option for that would be a console application, which this is a console application, kind of. It's a console application plus. So you'd want a regular console application that you execute at startup. And if you go back to Task Manager here, we have services. We also have startup. So this is what you'd want your application to be in. When Windows starts, I have a few things that start. Notice I don't have very many, but for example, Stream Deck, Microsoft Teams, the screen magnifier, Docker Desktop, my printer status, unfortunately, Cortana. Those kind of things are started by default. That's what you want to have happen. These are on my profile. For example, OneDrive on my profile because it's personalized and interacts with me. And so different people will have that same application start, but on their profile. Now, if an application starts under your profile, it does not need permissions because it's using your permissions. It's logged in essentially as you. Whereas this needs to have a login because it is not logged in as you, it's logged in as whatever you say it is under the logon menu. Okay, that's the difference. So services run unattended behind the scenes even when no one's logged in. That's what this is. Now, I've shown you Windows, but it can also run on Mac or Linux as a daemon. Okay, those, again, it's the same kind of thing as a Windows service, but it's just got a different name for Mac and Linux, and it runs, again, in automated fashion in the background. So worker services are really powerful tools when you use them right. All right, now let's just change our startup project to the worker service, and let's run this. I just want to show you one of the benefits of worker service is the fact that it runs as a console application only when I run it in debugging. When you install a worker service, it does not run as a console application. It runs as a service with no user interface. This black and green area is a user interface. So why does it have a user interface in debugging? Because it's really hard to debug something when you can't see what it's doing. So therefore, we have a UI for when it's in development. However, as soon as you publish this thing, it will not have a UI. Now, again, I cover all of this in the C# project site. If you go to the worker service, you'll see the intro to worker service video. You can learn lots more about that. Again, it's free. It will show you how that works. I didn't even mention the fact that a worker service can also work on the web. So really cool stuff you can do with services for automation. And a lot of what C# is about automating tasks or making tasks easier. And services are a great way to do that when it makes sense. Now, if you decide you need to have some user interactivity, then maybe a service isn't the right tool. The option, if you want something very, very similar, is a console application. A console application works great for semi-automated or automated tasks that you launch when necessary, or that you run as a background process but under your profile. So I use console applications quite a bit, even when I am doing recording. So when I record a video, one of the things that I do is I strip out the audio, I run it through a separate audio processor and bring it back into and reconnect it with the video in order to make it sound better. Well, that's all a manual process until I wrote a small little console application in C# that helps me do some of those steps automatically. It renames my files, it strips out the audio, it moves things around, it puts my notes with my files and all the rest. So it's a really helpful process, but I run that in the foreground because I kick that off and it's for the stuff that I'm doing when I'm logged in. Therefore, it's a console application, not a Windows service. So that's the difference there. So this is a great project type to know about, and it's one that's not often understood or known about. I'd encourage you to learn it, but just make sure you use it correctly and don't abuse it. It's designed to do a certain thing. Try and make it do something else can work in certain circumstances, but it's not always the best choice. In fact, it's almost never the right choice to make. Okay. So I think that's all the different kind of out there edge case service and other project types that I wanted to cover. Again, this video will be right down here for the overview video. But if you want to go dive into a specific topic, here's the 4 different types we covered today, the 4 big types. Again, that bonus project isn't here because it's not a C# project type. I've debated putting it there anyway because it's so closely related to C#. It's a SQL project type, but we'll see. It may end up there at some point. I'm not sure, but that's definitely another one you should at least understand or have a good idea about how it works. Okay, so that's it. Use this resource. Please take advantage of it. Use it to further your career. Make sure you add more tools to your toolbox because that's going to help you become more marketable. It's going to help you become better at your job and help you make better decisions when it comes to choosing a new technology. Thanks for watching. If you have any thoughts or comments, leave them down below in the comments in the YouTube video. That actually helps promote the video and make sure that other people see this video as well. As always, I am Tim Corey.